Today I'm here to do a video I did not expect to be filming in 2024, and that is my favorite new release thrillers for the year. Now I'm going to be using that term quite loosely, so I'm going to have a whole bunch of different books in different subgenres. So we have a spy thriller, domestic thrillers, and I really want to say, I've said it before but I'll say it again, something for everyone in this video because I've got a great variety of books and I do think you're going to find something you enjoy here, hopefully something new to put on your radar. If all that sounds good, let's get started. First, at the number 10 spot, we have Bodies to Die For by Lori Brandt, and this is a story that follows a fitness influencer who was previously overweight and basically became the after of those before and after stories that we all love to consume. And so we follow her, and within the world of health and influence and fitness, there is this murder that takes place and there's suspicion of who is behind it. And on top of that, you have this other perspective of the software engineer who is overweight herself, who wants to fight against fitness and diet culture, and so she goes on attacking this fitness influencer online, and of course eventually the stories start to come together and you see what's going on. This one I really enjoyed. I think that the audience who will best enjoy this one are those like myself that have some criticisms of fitness influencers and diet culture and things like that. If you're looking for a nuanced and interesting take on these industries and also looking to have a good thriller, I think you're going to find both, because again, it deals with all these topics, but at the same time there's a murder that takes place and there's a lot of suspicions being thrown around. There is suspense and intrigue and you're trying to guess who's all behind it. And I really thought this book had some good twists and turns, some good characters. No one was completely black or white. Instead, especially given the topic that the author is tackling, I thought they did a good job of making it more complicated and not being overly opinionated, instead leading the reader to make those decisions or opinions for themselves, which I really enjoyed. This one was so much fun, such a delight to read, and highly recommend. Then at number 9, we have American Rapture by C.J. Lead, and this is a novel that I'm going to call a piece of post-apocalyptic fiction that could also be described as a thriller. I'm putting in this video because it had to fit somewhere. I really enjoyed this book, and it's one that kind of subverts usual classification. It kind of bends into a couple different genres depending on what you're looking for or what you typically expect. And so this is one that is set in a future where there is this virus that when people become infected, they become filled with lust. And so we follow the story through the lens of this young woman, Sophie, who is trying to go and save her brother. And she grew up in a very conservative Catholic household, and so very much has a lot of strong religious opinions on the idea of saving your virtue and withholding yourself. And of course, this is all very much put to the forefront when you have this virus of lust. Now, this is an author I've read before, and loving Mayfly so much, I went to this one with high expectations, and while I still prefer that novella over this full-length novel, I still think this one is definitely worth reading. It's topical, it definitely has some points to be made, so if you are someone who enjoys, again, a more pointed social commentary, you'll certainly get that here. You get that deconstruction of religious overtones and a lot of the conversations surrounding that, and so if you're looking for that, if you enjoy a story that is definitely going to put that more to the forefront, but then also have these exciting moments, these post-apocalyptic events where you see the world falling apart. If that's something you enjoy reading or just are enraptured by, I do recommend this one. It's certainly a unique book. The writing is great, the storytelling moves very quickly, and it's a unique one for the year. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, I recommend putting this one on your list. Then perhaps the biggest surprise on this list is Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, and this is a story that follows a 30-something American spy who was sent off to France to do this dirty work. And so what transpires, I'm calling it a spy thriller, but I really need to be clear that this is much more a character-focused narrative that happens to be written within the structure of what would otherwise be a spy thriller. And instead we follow this woman, and really what it deals with is the nuances of having to be a spy. So I really enjoyed the little aspects. For instance, this woman is in a relationship, and so because of that, she has to deal with the requirements that come with having a significant other and having to put yourself out and go through those emotions and the awkwardness or just how off-putting it is. And it's just, I don't know, I thought this book was a lot of fun. For me, what made this book a favorite of the year particularly is the narrative voice. You have a really strong female voice written throughout the narrative, and particularly she just has really strong opinions. She does not hold anything back to the reader, and I just found it to be so entertaining. I encourage you, if you're interested in this book but on the fence, just check out perhaps the first sample chapter, because I think it's a book that for me hooked me from the start. And if you're looking for that, again, compared to other thriller books, you're not going to find a lot of action in this one, but certainly you have a bit of the suspense that goes around it. Just know that this one is perhaps a little bit more of a literary, character-driven take on the genre, but I found it to be such a delight, such a surprise, and for someone who doesn't read a lot of spy fiction, this was definitely the exception I needed to hook me into the genre. Then at number 7, we have The Teacher by Frida McFadden, and this is a story that's told from multiple perspectives. We have a young teenage girl who previously got another teacher in trouble by making some accusations about them. The story is told partially from that girl's perspective. We also have this teacher, and particularly we get the perspective of that teacher's wife, who is not quite sure what their husband is up to. And so within the story, you have a male teacher who is showing what appears to be appropriate interest in a young student, trying to encourage some of their academic pursuits in English. And so we follow them, and it's a story that very much, you know, there is more going on. And without spoiling too much, you can kind of tell from the setup I'm creating that this book is going to deal with the potential of a very inappropriate situation involving an adult in a position of power and a young person. And so what's interesting with this book is that it turns it into a thriller where it's a question of, is this in people's head? Are things happening? Are they not? And I was kind of cautious going into this one because I was really worried about a book like this taking very important subject matter and turning it into a juicy plot, because certainly the subject matter itself is incredibly serious. And while I have loved other books that involve this topic, typically they're coming from a very particular nuanced sense. So something like My Dark Vanessa, of course, the classic Lolita, and instead this one is turning it into a twisty, thrillery ride. But I really feel like the author, for me at least, did a good job of balancing it. So I felt like while they certainly made it a big twisty, turny adventure, at the same time, I felt the author was very clear about identifying who were the victims and who were the perpetrators and predators within the situation, and not blurring those lines and not romanticizing anything, and that is what I appreciate. Needless to say, this book was fun. It had some good surprises. Part of the story you'll be able to piece together as it's going along, but there certainly were some ending moments that came out of left field in the best possible way and made me love the story even more. I think Frida McFadden is an amazing storyteller. Highly recommend her. She has quickly become one of my favorite thriller authors, and if you haven't read her, this is a perfectly fine place to start as long as you can handle the subject matter. Next we have The Grey Wolf by Louise Penny, and this is the latest book in the mystery thriller series that follows Inspector Gamache. The entire series typically takes place around this remote Quebecois town in eastern Canada, this French community, and in each of the books we follow this inspector. And in this one, without giving away too much of the previous book, because each one is technically a standalone, we follow him as he's being contacted by someone. There is someone calling his phone. He has possibly had someone break into his house and take one of his personal possessions and then return it to him. It's very mysterious, it's very strange, and of course slowly it is revealed to the audience. This is a series that has the appearance of being a quaint, cozy mystery because of the setting and the depth of the characters surrounding it, but at the same time it does not shy away from the darkness of humanity in the stories that it tells. And so for me it's the right balance, because for me it's comforting, but yet it's not so ridiculously cozy that for me it would fall apart. Instead is engrossing enough that it just keeps me reading. I have read most of the backlist titles in this series, and in my opinion this is one of the best. I do recommend reading some of the earlier books first just to get a better idea of the characters, because there's a lot of character development that happens up to this point, but it is well worth it. I felt like this book was so earned and it was so satisfying to read. Highly recommend. It was such a good one. This series is so underrated in my opinion, unless of course you live in Canada, in which case you probably already know about this one, but please go check it out. Then breaking into the number 5 spot, we have The Burning by Linda Castillo. This is the latest book in a mystery thriller series that follows Kate Burkholder, a detective who lives in a town next to an Amish community, and so each of the stories typically involve the townspeople and also dealing with this religious culture and how they mesh or do not work together at times. Like with the last book I mentioned, this one is technically a standalone story, but there is a lot of character development that happens with the main protagonist and the side characters that does give a lot more context to this latest book. And so within this one, the main detective finds someone who is horribly burned, and the way that they are displayed, their body is quite horrific in nature. And so of course they have to investigate what is going on. This is one that had a great mystery to it, a lot of suspense. And for me, it was actually one of my favorites in the later books of the series, because in some of the earlier books, what I loved about it is that the series got quite dark. Again, you had the familiarity of some characters that you grow to love, but the nature of the crimes were often quite gruesome and quite dark, which appealed to that dark side of myself. But at the same time, I loved that there was a comforting nature of returning back to this small town. It was a strange juxtaposition, but it really worked. In some of the later books, I felt like it eased up a little bit and the plot points got a little softer and safer. This one gets really dark, and so I love that it goes back to the roots of the series. It does not shy away from the horrific moments. You have the autopsy and all of that. And so again, if you love something that is not quite cozy, but is also very addictive, highly recommend the series. You do want to start back at the beginning with Sworn to Silence. If you're like me, you will binge through all the books until you're caught up and are impatiently waiting the next. I will perhaps never stop reading this series. If they keep writing, I will read it. Then at the number 4 spot, we have Disturbing the Dead by Kelly Armstrong. This is a historical thriller book that follows a woman who is a police officer in the present day. However, through circumstances, she ends up going back in time and is now living in Scotland. She is in the body of this servant within this house. However, with time, she begins to get involved in the police procedurals that are happening in that day. And so we follow her in this third book, which again is a self-contained book, but really, once again, you have the character development from the first 2 books that really makes the third book so great. The basic premise of this one is that they are going to this event where they're going to be displaying a mummy that has been brought over from Egypt during some of the British raids where they are pulling things from the tombs. However, when they go to that event, they find out that the person who is being wrapped up and supposedly embalmed is not an ancient Egyptian's corpse, but instead someone who has recently been killed, specifically murdered, and so then they have to investigate what is happening. This is one that I very much love because I have completely fallen in love with the characters. I find the stories to be so entertaining. I love the back and forth between each of them. You have some great progression with each book, and I am admittedly someone who is a sucker for the person out of time trope. This reminds me of The Good Parts of Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. If you love that series and are looking for something that is similar, but more of a criminal thrillery twist to it, I really recommend this one. Again, start back at the beginning. If you're like me, you will just binge through the books, and I'm hoping there's more coming in this series because I love this book. I read it twice this year and I can't stop thinking about it. I just want more. Then at number 3, we have What Have You Done by Sherry Lapina. This is a book I talked about recently on my channel. This is a domestic thriller that follows around a town where there has been a young woman or young girl who has been found dead, and of course immediately there's a suspicion of the boyfriend, and then we follow the perspective of the boyfriend himself as well as his family members who are trying to protect him and keep him safe. However, there's a lot of interesting evidence that makes the boyfriend look really guilty. And what's interesting about the framing of this story is that it is presented in a way that we are told as the reader right from the start that the characters are not being truthful. The boyfriend is not telling the police everything. And so it is up to us to determine whether or not he is lying for reasons of guilt, or is there perhaps something else going on. I found this one so intriguing. I really love the mother's perspective because I could put myself in those shoes and picture being so torn between wanting to protect your child and also realizing that there's a lot of really bad evidence that is saying that your son is horribly, horribly guilty of this terrible crime, and trying to reconcile the two and come to some sort of moral conclusion as to what to do. So I love this book, and nothing I'm saying is giving away the plot. This is all in the setup, and from there you watch the twists and turns. You will have your suspicions move from one character to another and then back to the character, and I will just let you experience the ride for yourself. I found it so satisfying, so enjoyable, and it was just the kind of juicy domestic type thriller that I used to love and haven't really enjoyed in a long time. So it just felt like a delight coming home to a genre that I used to love so much and really falling in love with it all over again. Then at number 2, we have The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden. Yes, the same author who wrote The Teacher. This is the other book that they published this year. I do not know how they are so prolific, but I gotta say that I do not mind it. I think they're a fantastic storyteller, and while I love The Teacher, I love The Boyfriend even more. Might be a touch of recency bias because I didn't read this one more recently, recently, but this is one, of course, that follows a woman who is single and dating in New York. She has gone a string of bad dates, ending with a really horrible one when she ends up meeting a man who becomes supposedly the perfect boyfriend. However, you know that this is a twisty thriller, so perhaps he's not as perfect as he seems. And then on top of that, we have these flashbacks to a different point in time with different characters where there is a girl who has been found dead, and of course the police are investigating who is involved. Now, I will preface that if you read a lot of thrillers, you're probably able to get some of the early twists and turns within this book, but for me, it did not take away from my enjoyment. Instead, I would argue that the best authors are ones that don't rely on surprising or blindsiding the readers, and instead are able to build such enjoyable reads that it doesn't matter if you can see parts of the story coming. It is just so enjoyable to see the train wreck that is about to come your way, and I just enjoyed it. I read it so quickly because I could not stop. I couldn't put it down. It was so engrossing. And if you want one of the best thrillers that I read this year, so addicting, highly recommend. It was a ton of fun. And again, really a thriller that made me fall in love with the genre again. I did not expect to be making this video, this standalone top 10 thriller video this year, and I could not be happier. And finally, at the #1 spot, we have Lost Man Lane by Scott Carson, and this is a supernatural thriller that follows a young man who at the beginning of the story sees this girl get into the car of an individual, and then later she is reported missing. He appears to be the last one who has seen her and the only person who can potentially identify who took her, and so naturally he goes to the police and the story goes from there. So it's one that is a coming of age story because it's very much about the loss of innocence for this young man, this horrific event that really traumatizes him and changes the trajectory of his early life. And then of course you also have the larger mystery of what happened to this girl. And this is one that kind of blends together genres, so I don't want to give away too much of what is going to happen and instead let you enjoy the twists and turns as they come for yourself. I really love this one. It was one of the best coming of age narratives I've read this year. Certainly I could have put this in my horror video, but frankly that video is full, and I think that this one leans a little bit more on the thriller side rather than the straight up horror, given the subject matter and the way that the book is presented. So highly recommend this one. If you love either genre, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Definitely one of the best books of the year, and I'm so glad I didn't miss out on it. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And let me know what is your favorite thriller that was published in 2024. Don't forget that I am not done with dark fiction this year, so I'm going to have a separate top 10 favorite horror books coming in the next coming week. So if you haven't yet, please stick around and subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, I appreciate the thumbs up, dropping a comment, even if just an emoji. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.